So I made 3 videos to cover how to add pausing and levels to the game. I made another one to how to give the enemies or the array an item. And this is really important because often you'll be like, oh, I want my enemy to have its own speed or have its own size or have its own picture, or I want one enemy to go faster than another enemy. So this number 2 is really important for that. And then number 3, I give an enemy health and and an image, which really makes it be able to be a boss. But I don't know that I don't know if we play the game. I didn't really finish it. Like it's not great, and I expect you to do that. So I've got one type of enemy there, and then when I get to level 2, I have a second enemy, right? And that enemy requires more shots, right? So you could see how I can make a boss out of that. I'm going to do that, or I'll try and do that. That's not really the point of this video. The reason why I thought I should make this video is because when I think about you trying to learn, I think of you watching this video and typing and getting really annoyed because you're typing and trying to learn at the same time, right? And so I want to give you one video where you can see all the code. I would suggest it's better to watch the video and actually try and understand and not try and copy the code. You get what I mean? So I see a lot of you like watching and typing at the same time. I wonder if you're actually learning that way. Probably do a watch, and I'm going to have this last video, and I'm slowly going to cover all the code, okay? I'm actually going to fix it. So this will let you see all the code. There's no retyping. I'm going to clean it up a little bit. If you're just copying the code, maybe copy it from here. Okay, so right now, I'm slowly going down, and you can compare this to your code. Okay, and I'm just going to tell you what each line does. I'm just going through and trying to clean up the mess that I made before I do that. Like all these white spaces. And let's talk about what every line does. It's actually not that big of a code. Okay. Pretty good. Well, there is a lot of code. Never mind. Okay. So, let's start at the top and we'll talk about what each one does. We have variables, right? So this is where we put variables at the top of our code. If we have something in our code that needs to change later on, that's called a variable. And unlike other languages, if you've ever used like Java or C or Python, we have like types of variables like integers, strings, doubles, which mean decimals, all sorts of different variables. Open processing is kind of weird. It just says let. And what let means is I'm making a variable and you figure it out if it's an integer or a text. Like we're not actually telling it what it is. So open processing kind of like tries and understands what it's going to be based on what we set it to. Okay? So what variables do we have? We have player X, player Y, player speed. Okay? Which is an interesting thing. We don't have that for laser. Why don't we have laser X, laser Y, and laser speed?
It's later on.
It's later on. That's one answer. But to be more specific, what is it? Yes, yes, yes. So there's 2 ways to do things. One, we can make a whole bunch of variables for everything that we want for the player. And that works. Or we can make a class, and if we go down to the bottom and we see class laser, and then it has the same things inside its constructor. This dot X, this dot Y. That makes an X for the laser. That makes a Y for the laser. That makes a speed for the laser. Okay? What are the advantages of doing it as a class? What? It's a lot easier if I want to make it an array because then I have an array of enemies. I could still do an array of players, right? But I would have to do one for each variable. You understand what I mean? Whereas here with my enemies is in a class 2, I can make an array of everyone in it. Okay? Probably a little confusing. That's why we're going to do sort of a similar game, or at least the concept similar, again next. Okay? So laser is not in an array. Some of you are trying to do that. It's a little difficult. I probably, unless you're up for the task, I wouldn't bother with this one. We'll do 2 arrays later. Enemies is an array, and that's what this means right here. Okay? I made a pause variable. I made a pause message. So if we're paused, it displays the pause message. We have a setup. Setup happens at the beginning. It sets the size. You should probably change that size because it's a small little square. Make it bigger. We set our players' variables. We make one enemy, and we add it to the list, adding it to the list with push. Okay? Does it need to be called enemy 1?
No.
No. Okay. Because later on, look at this. Later on, when I add enemies, they're all enemy 1. Enemy 1, enemy 1. Are those all enemy 1? No, they're not enemy 1. That's just actually a temporary name that I gave it. Okay? It's just added to the list, and it lives in the list. Okay? So if I was doing Word, it loses its name. Okay? I'm going to open up Word just because I can show you a table. I say list, but sometimes you don't know what that means. This is what a list looks like, right? And so I make enemy 1. I set it up, enemy1.speed equals whatever, its color equals whatever, and then I add it to the list. Then I do it again, then I can do it again, and I add it to the list. It's kind of confusing because they're all called enemy 1. But you'll see later on, we don't use that name when we pull it. We pull it from the list. So whatever enemy we pulled, we give it a name. Okay? So we'll go through and look at this. So I make an enemy, I set it to however I want, I add it to the list, I make a new laser. When I draw, I clear the background. If I'm paused, I display a pause message. If I'm not paused, this was the core game that we had. This moves the hero. This makes him not be able to leave. That was some cool code. This draws the player, which is just a rectangle with its X, Y, and this is the width and height of the player. If I want the player to change sides, I would need to make a player width and player height and put it there. What would the initial value of my width be? And what would the initial value of my height? So it's an interesting thing about variables. We don't always need to use a variable. Why do we not need to use a variable for player width and player height? Because it never changes. But if you made a bonus item that made the player bigger, you would have to go up here. You would have to go let player width equal 30, right? Then we'd have to go back down here and say player width. Now I'm not doing that, but I'm saying that's why we have variables, is because, I'm going to change this later in the game. So I need the variable to change. Otherwise, if I know it's always going to be 30, probably easier just to do that. Okay? This moves the laser. This displays the laser. And it says laser.move. I was saying earlier that classes can have variables, like laser.x. Laser.x is the laser's x position. But it can have variables, and it can also have, what's move? Move is a function. So what's cool about classes is they can have their own functions. So if we look at laser, right, it has a function called move, and that's what move is. Okay? If you're making something that gets really complex, like an enemy that has a lot of things, it's nice to make it as a class. If you're making something simple which just sits on the screen and moves, it has an X and a Y position, like the player, you probably don't need it to be a class. Okay? Some people go overboard and make everything a class, and that's cool. Some people go underboard and make nothing a class, and that's cool, but it's very confusing. Okay, so I'm trying to show you both ways. Player is not a class, enemies is, and it's also an array. Anyways, we keep drawing. I think we're almost done. This displays the instructions. This is class enemy. Notice class enemy has a constructor. This happens when we create it. It has a move. This moves the enemy to the left. X equals X minus speed. This resets it. Well, actually, this says if you're off to the left, reset, and reset is this right here. All reset does is move it to the right so that it can come again. This draws it, which draws a rectangle, which actually draws it used to draw a rectangle, but now it draws an image. And that was in the third thing, a boss, when I did the boss, I got it to draw an image so that you can have a bigger or a different looking scary boss. Class laser works the same. Key pressed is when we hit space to fire. I had this code right here. This adds new enemies, but that was just to test it. Like if I hit A, another enemy comes. That's like a hack, right? Like you ever play a video game and the coder left something in there? You know, we probably don't need that. We don't want the user adding his own enemies. So I would comment it out, or I could just delete it. Probably don't need it anymore. This is a function that collides with. We're going to need this function one more time, actually. What do we need it for that I haven't shown you how to do? Yeah, notice we don't check if the enemy hits the player. Okay? So we need to do that. And I'll probably save that for the last video, or I'll just give it to you. Okay? But it's a challenge is to figure out how do we know if the enemy hits a player. I left it out because we don't need it right now. And then check level. We call this whenever we kill a boss, and it says, okay, if the score is 3, pause the game, make an enemy, and let's go to level 2. One of the things I don't do in this code, look at this. This is level 2. How many enemies do we create for level 2? How many enemies do we create right there? Push adds an enemy to the list. How many enemies are we adding to the list? 1. But there's 2 enemies in level 2. Why are there 2? The first enemy is still there, right? If you notice that. So that first enemy actually comes back, okay? And that sort of works. But if we ever want a boss and it's just one boss, then it doesn't make any sense because the other enemies will still be there. So what I might want to do is say, okay, let's clear the list. We don't want the old enemies. We're gonna make, if we want 5 enemies, we'll make 5 enemies. To clear the list, I might go enemies equals, okay? That says there's no one in it anymore. Okay, and to prove that to you, now if I go to level 2, this purple one will not come back. Okay, and I only have that. Okay, so if I want to add him now, I can add it manually. Okay? Now I want to show you one thing just at the end. I never really showed how to make a boss, right? Because I guess the green one's kind of a boss. It has a high health. But let's say in the last one, in level 3, we will have an enemy. Let's make its health really big, like let's say 10. And let's actually change its speed. I wonder if we can do that. It's any1.size equals, I don't know, 50? What's the size by default? Go to the enemy class and see. Okay, the size is 50 by default. So I'm actually going to maybe 4 times that. So in level 2, we're going to do one with 200.
That might be take out the entire thing, though.
Yeah, let's see. We're still going to clear it because I only want 1 enemy on the last level. So this one. In level 2, I probably want a few enemies. So level 2, let's do it again. So this creates an enemy and adds it. It creates a green enemy, right? So let's create another green enemy. Notice that when I copy and paste, I have to get rid of the let. Anyone know why I have to get rid of the let? Yeah, we're using it again. Okay? We created an enemy called enemy1. We added it to the list. Its name no longer matters. So I'm just reusing that variable and adding it. Or if I don't want to delete the enemy, I could also do this, change this to 2. That works too, but now I have to change it every time. They both do the same thing. Okay, because the name doesn't matter, its position in the list matters. Let's see. So this enemy now has 10 health. Actually, I'm going to change its speed. Actually, you know what? Maybe, yeah, well, I could do something where its speed, like it moves differently, right? But I'll let you worry about that. But I'm just going to, it's a boss, it goes slow, but it takes a while to hit. Okay. Okay, wow, there's my boss. Okay, and I'll just show you one other thing. So notice how it's big. It's not really scary. I'm going to give it a health bar. I'll just show you how we could give it a health bar, and then I'm done. Couple things. Does it health reset? Notice, actually, I have a bug. Once it's dead and it comes back, its health is 0. And I think that's because reset doesn't reset its health. Yeah. I'm going to give it a health bar. So if in display, not in display right here, I'm drawing the image, the thing. I can go, first off, I can just tell you its health. Right on top of the image, text. So I'm going to say, my health is this dot health. And let's display that information right where the enemy is. So what this should do is draw a text box wherever the enemy is that says what its health is. And that would be for every enemy. What'd I do? This dot health. Yeah, inside of class, you always have to use this. It's actually kind of annoying. That's kind of cool, eh? That's actually really useful just for debugging what's going on. The other thing you can do is, if we wanted it to look like a health bar, we could draw a rectangle, right? So we could say, I want to draw a rect at, I know the position, I want to do it at this X and Y, right? So I want to draw a rectangle, which is going to look like a health bar at the enemy's X and Y, but I actually want it to be a little bit above. So I'm going to say maybe minus 10. So the health bar is just hovering above the player. And its width is going to be its health. Okay? That's like in Street Fighter or Mortal Kombat or really any of those games. The bar is the width of your health, right? And maybe 4's, like if it has 5 health, that's really small. It's 5 pixels. So why not times 10? Okay? So if you have 5 health, the rectangle is 50 wide. Okay? Comma. And then its height is maybe 10. So let's see if that looks like a health bar. Okay, I'm going to get rid of the text, so I don't need it because I have a health bar. Oh, look at that. So that, oh yeah, that looks cool, eh? See? Oh yeah, I got a little health bar. And if you wanted, you could only enable the health bar for the boss. So say if health is greater than 10, like we're not going to give health for little insignificant ones. Why did I get a error? Yeah, I know why I got an error. This might actually, it's not ready. This is one of the few Probably one of the few ones that you wouldn't know by reading it. Usually you can just read and find out what the error is, but this one's not telling you. I think it's because this dot health is 0, so how do you draw a rectangle that's 0? So probably this code is better if I just go, if I go 1 plus. So at the very minimum, it's going to be that, you know. Like I said, I could also say if this dot health is greater than 5. And that means it's only going to draw a rectangle for enemies that have a health greater than 5, so little guys won't have it. Yeah?
Where's the enemy that has 6 and health raised this, but then his health drops below 5?
Oh, yeah. You know, so there's, yeah, you're right. It would stop happening for the boss. Good point. So at that point, at some point, and even with the reset, remember I was saying reset, it resets? At some point, we may actually want 2 variables. Initial health, current health. So when I reset an enemy, it goes back to its current health. Okay, so he is a good point. If my boss, its health bar would disappear when it's less than 5. So I would actually want to say if your initial health is greater than 5. Okay, but I'm not going to code that. This is all for you to figure out if you want. So for this assignment, I've shown you how to do a few things. It's quite hard to follow it. So if you can get that done, I would say like a low level 3. If you add some if you add some images to it, like shine off and polish it, that's a level 3 plus. If you add some cool features, that's a level 4. Okay?